How poor were you growing up? I learned not to ask for things because I knew I wouldn't get it. I was the only kid in the 7th grade that couldn't go on the field trip. The fee was $5. Growing up with a mom who was addicted to drugs was pretty rough mostly. She could never keep up a job and sold all our food stamps and gifts my dad sent us for pills and cigarettes. I remember eating saltine crackers and ramen noodles for dinner a lot. Around birthdays and Christmas my sister and I would get nice gifts, but my mom always sold them not long after for her habits. I'm guessing the only reason we had food most times and clothes that weren't donated to the church was because my grandpa stepped in. I live with him now and still every time we go out to eat and I see something that costs more than $5 I wonder how anyone can afford it. Even though my grandpa has a good job and we don't struggle anymore, I still worry about money. Hang in there, work hard, make good choices, and you can make yourself a better life in the future just like I did. We have a similar background. I'm glad you have a supportive grandpa. My mom and dad were high school dropouts and my mom had me when she was 17. I grew up in a 3-room shack with no electricity and a wood stove. It barely had running water for the one toilet and one sink. To run a light at night my dad would pull the battery out of the beat up piece of crap Ford Fairlane at night and hook wires to a light bulb. My birthday money from family members was my new pair of shoes every year and clothes were hand-me-downs from anyone my mom could make friends with. Rice and beans every dang night of the week. Even reduced lunch was too expensive, so my mom made PB&J and I ate cracked fricking wheat every morning for breakfast. That crap disgusts me now. On my birthday one year my dad and I walked to the Starvin Marvin gas station on Oglethorpe Ave in Athens, GA, and he bought me a 50-cent Coke. On the way back home I tripped and it fell out of my hand, hit a rock and exploded. My dad really couldn't afford another 50 cents, but he walked all the way back and bought me another one. Then everything changed. My dad was working in a machine shop for a bunch of engineers. He made the items that they designed. Well, he started finding ways to make their designs better, so they let him go to the design meetings. Then they showed him how to use CAD and he was drawing up blueprints. Then all of the engineers got laid off. One of those engineers got a new job at a place called Vision, and he told the managers there about this really exceptional engineer he knew. So my dad, with no high school diploma, was hired as an engineer based on word of mouth of other engineers. Our lives changed overnight. We had new clothes, a new car, bought a house, and for my next birthday I got a freaking Nintendo with one game. Holy crap. That was like heaven opening up and raining miracles on me. Now he's the vice president of R&D for a small company in Atlanta and he has put every single one of his 5 sons through 4-6 years of college. The part about your dad buying you another Coke even though you guys couldn't afford it made me tear up. He sounds like a really great guy and I'm happy everything has worked out in the end. I honestly didn't realize that we were poor until I was in my teens. Me and my sister always got new clothes before the new school year, always had pretty good Christmas, and never went hungry. We lived in a pretty rural area surrounded by woods. We always had a big garden and grew everything from greens to hot peppers. I spent many a summer having pea picking competitions with my dad and helping him make his own hot sauce. Spent a lot of time on the bayou fishing, and during hunting season every free minute was spent in the woods hunting. It wasn't until I was about 16 that I realized what my parents had to go through to provide. I learned that we had a garden to have vegetables. I always thought that hunting and fishing was just a hobby for me and my dad, but it was what provided meat for us. If we didn't bring anything home we didn't eat. They always managed to trick me into thinking everything was a game. I remember my dad buying me my actual rod and reel. He would tie old nuts and bolts on the string and challenge me to casting competitions. Who could get closest to that tree or whatever, not knowing that he was trying to increase my accuracy to avoid having to replace baits. I remember when my grandfather gave me his old Malin .22 when I was about 10. I would spend my $5 a week allowance on bullets and just target shoot every day. My dad and grandfather would always set up new challenges and whatnot. I became a real good shot by the next hunting season and I was then a squirrel and rabbit hunting machine. I think this is such a good example of how living off the land is completely different from being poor in the city. Urban incomes might be higher than rural incomes, but so is the cost of living, and the quality of life is often far worse. As a very young child, my mom was a single mother raising 2 girls on what the government offered poor parents in the 90s and some help from family. We didn't live on our own until I was nearly 6, and we often had pizza, which consisted of slices of bread, ketchup stolen from fast food places, and American cheese. I loved it and our meager existence. Literally, I have no bad memories of that time at all and remember it as just this adventure part of my life when mom and me and my sis spent a lot of time together doing weird stuff. Then mom finished her nursing degree, met the man who raised us from age 5, 1/2 on, and started earning enough to make a living. We were never upper middle class, and we were often lower middle class, but we always had food to eat and clothes to wear after that. My mom worked her butt off for me and my sis, and my dad came with 2 more kids of his own. I've never met 2 harder working people, and their efforts really helped me grow into a person who appreciates hard work and self-made success. Our house is older than dirt and falling apart at the seams in some places, but we love it and all the memories made there are good. We used to have that exact pizza, too, warmed up in the toaster oven. Even in my 30s, I still get a taste for it sometimes. My family used to live in a squatter's area in a third world country. My father only made less than $20 a day. He was a driver for a public vehicle. Assuming he made $15 for 8 hours, this would be split between the vehicle's owner and the gas expenses. My mom stayed at home and started a few small businesses. In 5 years or so we never had a bed, just a sleeping mat, a few pillows, and a blanket that fit the 3 of us on the floor. We also didn't have a proper dining table. It was a DIY small table from scrap wood that we placed on the floor, the same floor where we would sleep when we were about to eat, then had it lean on the wall when unused. My mom was smart enough to not give birth to another child, realizing that raising 1 child alone was too much an expense. It was my mom's business that saved us. We eventually managed to afford a bed, then a CRT TV, then a fridge, and then a phone. By the time I got a computer I was already 13 and in a private high school, something that a lot of families couldn't afford. My mom passed away before I graduated from college, but left behind quite a few sum that kept me and my father alive for the next 2 years. Our house is still up in that area and my father lives there by choice. I moved out because of work. One time my stepdad was so excited he found $1 in his jeans that he didn't even notice my brother falling down the steps. What if every time you found money you just unknowingly made a deal with the devil? Like, if you pick up this $1 your son will fall off the stairs. That crap would be cool as frick though. Both of my grandpas worked 45 years at a distillery while running a farm on the side. We never ate out, but we always ate well. Apple, pear, plum, and persimmon trees, blackberry, raspberry, grapes and boysenberry, fish from 4 ponds, cows, pigs, sheep, chickens, and wild game. My other friends went on vacations and flew on planes. I thought we didn't have all that much. Glad I lived long enough to know. I didn't know that other 7-year-olds' chores didn't include catching, killing, and skinning squirrels for dinner. For reference, I live in Kansas City, Missouri. Being afraid to ask for things because you know the answer will be no, and getting used to not being able to afford things. Eventually, you just throw out school flyers about school shirts, field trips that cost money, lunch money, school supplies, dances, trips, anything that costs anything. You learn to accept what you have and make it work. And when you actually get something, you understand that it actually means something and costs your parents money they had to work for. Once I had my first job, I actually wasted the money on things I just kinda wanted because I had the luxury of being able to. It took a long time to learn to manage money wisely and it's still a process, because when you never have it, it's hard to understand how to hold on to it. There is a mentality when you are poor that you should spend the money quickly to buy things you want because if you don't it will be nickeled and dimed to death on things you need. Then you, seemingly, have nothing to show for it. My mom was addicted to drugs and our life was completely unstable. She worked as a bartender, sometimes 3 jobs, but was constantly being fired for various things and starting at a new bar. Sometimes she wouldn't come home for days. We were evicted from every house we ever lived in. I can't even tell you how many different schools I've been to without thinking it through. We were often homeless and had to live in seedy motels. Our car got repossessed. Electric, water, gas were shut off several times throughout my life. I started life out with horrible credit even before I turned 16 because my name had been used to start electric, water, gas or whatever on various occasions and then went and paid. To this day I have an aversion to meat, eggs, milk because I've had food poisoning so often from bad food. We used to eat at school over summer break because I had a lunch program running for neighborhood kids, so even though I didn't go to summer school I qualified and my brother and I would walk to the school to eat. Teachers used to give us hand-me-down clothes shoes cause ours would have holes in them or whatever. We both got made fun of a lot for general clothing appearance issues relating to poverty. Once when I was in high school I was dating an older man who was abusive and we were evicted from our home and had to be out by midnight. My mom was working a shift and afterwards I had no idea where she went because she suggested I move in with my boyfriend instead since we really had nowhere to go. After a few days of getting beat up I caught her at work and found out she had been staying with my brother on the floor of one of her random customers' apartments. He let me go there that night but the three of us were sleeping on the floor and I remember it being so hot and I just felt totally defeated by life and really heartbroken over everything. I was scheduled to take my SAT the next day at school but missed it. Ended up getting a job at McDonald's and dropping out of school shortly after to work more. Staying with my abusive boyfriend on and off because it was better than nothing. Or just walking through the city all night sometimes because nothing was better than the boyfriend. And eventually was able to rent a room and get more of a stable life going despite a general trend in young adulthood towards abusive relationships and other obstacles I faced largely in part due to leftover childhood poverty issues. We were homeless at one point. Mum was swamped with debt because she could not afford to care for 2 children on NHS pay. She did it though and me and my sis vowed to never be in debt thanks to what she taught us about money. Also I bought her a car because that woman is the best. My mum would specifically go to 2 ATMs across the street from each other and withdraw 20, run across the street to withdraw another 20 before the bank realized that the account was negative from the first withdrawal. Growing up I remember multiple meals that were literally slices of spam and nothing else. A can would do between 2 and 3 days at a push. At my poorest, as an adult, I ate even less than that. My mom would count the pennies in my dad's jeans to see if we had enough to buy bread each week. Our fridge was hardly ever full and I remember we always had milk and dozens of boxes of Kraft dinner. We lived in Canada at the time, but bread and peanut butter was a treat back then. When my mom finally broke down and told my grandma did her a solid and bought her a bread making machine. It was the most delicious bread I ever tasted. We saved enough money that I got 3 Christmas presents instead of just 1. A few years later my dad went from an underpaid scientist to a cushy American government job and our living situation drastically improved. My sister has forgotten those days, but I remember and save all the change I can find in a jar, just in case. Butter and bread equals lunch. I always went with mayo. My mom used the butter for her English muffins so we weren't allowed to eat either. Gifts on Christmas and birthdays are things you need, not fun things. Christmas is usually when I got all my soap and shampoo for the next year. Clothes come from Goodwill, Salvation Army, Savers, etc. If they weren't coming out of Something's Lost and Found. School yearbooks and pictures are unnecessary. The best meals of the week would be the half-eaten food my mother brought home from her waitress job at the country club. I always thought I grew up poor because my parents were always stressed about money, but I always had food, and I always had a roof over my head. I just remember having our heat shut off in the winter and living in the Midwest where it gets really cold. It was pretty bad. We all slept in a room with a little electric heater, and had to be up extra early to get ready for school because we had to heat our bath water on the stove and dump it into the tub. I remember thinking that was as bad as it gets, but then I grew up and realized I had it easy. Electricity and phone getting cut off. Asking the neighbor to lend bread for school sandwiches poor. Never had enough undies or socks poor. Bought school shoes way too big and resold them until they fell apart poor. But we were happy. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I asked Mum, are we poor? I was born in a family that worked in the crop fields of someone else. When I turned 15 I was made to work in the fields. I understood why and was happy to aid my poor family. We had a small hut and then everything changed when I finally got a job at an IT company. I feel like you left out a detail or 3 here. When I was born, my parents were very poor, ate ramen noodles and canned beans a lot from I understand. They had to share on Old Eagle Summit and could not afford rent without assistance from my grandparents. They had to pick between putting gas in the car for my dad to get to work, rent, or whatever food we could get our hands on. Government assistance was not an option. From what my mom has since told me, we made too high of an income to qualify for welfare, but we were too poor to really get by. What was fricked up to me was that my mother came from a blue-collar, working poor family, but my father's parents were very wealthy. The poor grandparents scrambled and sold for every coin they had to help my parents out. The rich grandparents, they hung up on my mom and dad when they would call them for help. Very poor. My family lived in the boiler room basement of an old apartment. I thought my family was poor because all we ate was ramen. Then I visited a friend and all she had was cat food in her cabinet. I asked her where her cat was and she said she didn't have one. This makes me sad every time I think of it. We had to decide which utilities we were going to keep on each month. I can remember a few months where the electric bill wasn't paid and we chilled our milk and frozen groceries in the snow. Remember my mom sitting my brother and I down to explain we couldn't afford to rent blockbuster movies anymore. I remember asking my mom, are we poor? She said something along the lines of no, but birthday and Christmas are going to be very small this year. On the upside, my parents started a soda company and made millions afterwards and are now happily retired. All the other kids had backpacks, and I stuck my arms through the holes of a plastic grocery bag to wear it like it was one. I grew up in a single wide trailer. We ate actual government cheese and peanut butter, which was awful because it was thin, oily, and contained whole peanut parts. We only shopped in the generic aisles of the grocery store. It's not like today with brightly colored great value products. All the packaging was stark white with the product description simply declared in bold black. Cornflakes, pitted pear halves, mechanically separated chicken product. I don't remember being conscious of the fact that we were poor. I just thought TV movie families like the Keatons, Family Ties, or the Griswolds were unusually wealthy. Immigrant living in Brooklyn when I was 6. Our family of 5 was supported by my dad being an unlicensed cab driver. All our new clothes are purchased in warehouses from bins with exploding ink stains poor. All our vegetables come from cans poor. We couldn't even afford name brand ramen noodles. You have been visited by the safety doggo. Subscribe and you will. I'll be safe from all danger for the next 24 hours. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.